Welcome to the special series here on Audioversity. Joining us today, acclaimed author, researcher, and professor with a PhD in government, currently teaching here at Reichman University, as well as a research associate at the Center for Policy Research at the University of Albany, SUNY, and soon a visiting scholar to the Taub Center for Israel Studies at NYU, author of the award-winning book, Public Preferences and Institutional Designs, Israel and Turkey Compared, Dr. Niva Golan Nadir. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Jonah.
So I figured let's just dive right into it. So what we're mainly going to be talking about today is sort of civil society in Israel, since that's your main area of expertise and really what you taught us a lot about last year when we had you as a professor. So first question I want to ask is, civil society has significantly increased its operations and what it's been doing since the war started. What do you think are the main reasons for that happening?
Okay, so this is a very interesting question, but before we begin, let's just understand for a moment what is civil society. So civil society is the overall network of organizations and associations, even communities that cooperate in order to supply some kind of a service or a product, or that they wish to voice some kind of demand, and they are located in the realm between the individual citizen and the state. Okay, they're trying to make some kind of a claim. Civil society is a precondition for democracy. It is a variable that is considered important for sustainable democracy. Nevertheless, in order to become civil society or a civic movement, there should be, or this organization should follow some kind of a process. It should begin with the framing. What is our purpose? What is it that we're trying to initiate or support? Then this organization needs to have resources, right? They need to find a way for human and financial resources in order to fund and create whatever it is that they're trying to do. And at the end of the day, they are pursuing mobilization of the idea and of the work that they're trying to do. So if we take this definition of civil society, then what we see today at wartime in Israel, to a large extent, is not the classical civil society that we're talking about, but a very strong and active backline, the rear of the war, if you may. We see people taking on their personal resources, their personal expertise to supply services like educational, psychological, to people in need because of the war, or resources. Sometimes they even do laundry for the soldiers. They cook in their own kitchens. They're trying to do the best that they can for those evacuated, especially from the south, the Gaza envelope area, and the north, of course. So this is mainly what we see. We know that this is the Jewish notion of Am Yisrael Arevim Ze Lazeh, the Jewish people guarantee to one another. And this is a lot of what we see. But indeed, there are some civil society organizations that existed prior to the war, and they have reframed their purposes from their goals before the war to support the war. One of the, I think, most significant examples is Achim Laneshek, Brothers in Arms, that they were created prior to the war on the basis of the judicial reform, anti-judicial reform movement, and this is what they did. But with the wake of the war, they have completely transformed their goals and begun doing everything in their power, taking all of their resources in order to contribute to the soldiers, providing them with food, with equipment, sometimes even military equipment that they should have received from the institution of the army. So this is exactly what they're doing right now. Can a civil society organization change its goals? Yes, it can. It should, of course, explain why. This is, by the way, why the Internal Revenue Service decided to provide a tax refund to all those associations that have changed their goals but still accept donations, because otherwise conflicting donations would be taxed. So it is aware of the fact that their goal was altered. So at the end of the day, we're talking about some civil society organizations operating, but at the same time, we're talking about even more citizens, businesses, and networks that are completely individual and personal, taking on their personal belongings, personal resources, and directing them to the war. Okay, so this is the main thing that we're seeing right now.
Right. And as you mentioned, one of the biggest contributions has to do with food, whether it's people making sandwiches, packing food, volunteering at restaurants, wherever it may be. Some controversies have actually come out about non-kosher food being allowed onto army bases and various other areas. What are some of the reasons for that?
Yes. So, as a part of state-religion relations and the arrangements of religion within the institutional framework in the State of Israel, well, there is no separation between state and religion to a large extent. One of the requirements is that public kitchens, the military kitchens included, of course, should have kosher kitchens. Okay, so soldiers supposed to eat kosher food regardless if they're secular or not. This is an ongoing debate, by the way, that the Supreme Court intervened and was a part of the debate, especially about the Passover, non-kosher Passover food that soldiers were actually sanctioned at, because they've entered non-kosher food into their base. So basically what happened is that all these people that we've just called them the rear of the war, they're the ones contributing their resources, cooking in their own kitchens, and contributing to people that are in need right now, joined by restaurants. They're private businesses, business owners, and they taking on their restaurants, all of their resources and applies, and they're trying to cook and send it to the bases or wherever, even those people in reserve duty are in the wait for now, before the war actually began. What happened is that when they arrived at the bases, so the base rabbi or the kosher inspection soldiers that are this is their military duty, well, they've denied the entrance of the food, and it was a great problem that caused much, first of all, financial losses and disappointment among all these people that really wanted to contribute. At the end of the day, I'll give you an example. It is called the Achim restaurant, the Brothers restaurant in Tel Aviv, and they're a non-kosher restaurant. After they've actually needed to throw away 2,000 dishes they've cooked because it was forbidden to the soldiers, they contact the Israeli president, Herzog, and they've asked him, help us to gain some kind of a speedy kosher food authorization in order to be able to cook and contribute. He actually helped them, and they have achieved this kosher food certificate, a very temporal one, but this is amazing and highly impressive because it goes, first of all, it's very costly to do, and it goes against their core ideology, their core secular ideology, just in order to contribute. And the fact that they needed to actually have the president involved in order to get a speedy process of kosher food certificate is also very interesting in regards of the complications that are caused because of this. But basically, it should be mentioned that the army has food for its soldiers. But this is the Jewish way. We make people happy through food. So this is the reason why food is contributed so much throughout the war.
Yeah, and sort of going off that, that's sort of like a kind of a friction that we've seen. And sort of talking about frictions, before the war, we saw a lot of friction in Israeli society, whether it was over the judicial reforms or right versus left, whatever it may be. One of them had to do with the Haredi community, ultra-Orthodox community, on the basis of the draft law, where they're sort of not where they're allowed to not draft into the army because they're focused their time on learning Torah and Jewish studies and things of that nature. Since the outbreak of the war, we've seen some members of this ultra-Orthodox Haredi community draft into the army. I remember a few weeks after the war started, I remember seeing a video online of some member of like 100, 120 drafting into the army. Do you think this is simply a result of the conflict, of the need for people to be in the army right now? Or is this sort of ongoing changes that we're starting to see a larger change in the community regardless of the war?
Okay, so first of all, another arrangement that has to do with state-religion relations is Haredi community, Haredi men being exempt from for military service. This actually began with the authorization of David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister. He actually agreed that 400, only 400, Torah sages back at state establishment would be exempt. Why? This was exactly after the Holocaust. No more Torah sages remain, unfortunately. So this is the source of the authorization. Back then, very, very much legitimate. With time, we see that we have the numbers alter between, it depends really who counts, but tens of thousands of Torah sages that are not drafted into the military, causing severe inequality, especially when the service goes from 2.5 to 3 years. So many secular men and women do complain for the injustice. What we see right now, I've actually searched for it, and usually each year we have about 1,200 Haredi men that are drafted or request to be drafted or agree to be drafted. And we see that the number doubled itself now throughout the war. But what's interesting is who did that. We're talking about men in their 30s and 40s, not your young soldier character that we know. And also, they're all in service supply professions like healthcare, social work, professions that they feel can contribute at the time of war. So this is not the fighter soldier that they're applying to be. So currently, only about 120 Haredi men were drafted during the war. This is, of course, a very individual aspiration to be a soldier. We are not talking about a political change. The political religious parties did not change their agenda, nor they ever will. And of course, this is not something at the core of the Haredi society, but we see various individuals from different streams within this public that have decided to contribute after everything that they've seen happen. So this is basically what we see. We shall experience more of this friction about drafting in Israel.
Yeah, I'm sure we're definitely going to be seeing more of that. So you mentioned societal unity earlier, and the fact that we've seen lots of parts of society, especially when you look before the war, Israel was in the midst of the judicial reforms. Big controversy. And now you're seeing soldiers, one of whom was protesting against it and one of whom was a big supporter of it, taking photos together and smiling because they're like, we're putting aside our differences right now. We're fighting a war. We're gonna focus on that later. Do you think that this is actual unity of what we're seeing right now? Or is it just that the House of Israel, so to speak, is at peace with itself right now?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I cannot say that I see the end of the conflict, the inner conflict in Israel, the friction that we saw so severe before the war. I think that we are actually gonna have this friction enhanced because it was argued many times that sources of intelligence actually reported that the enemies of Israel envision everything that happens in the country. They see the friction. They see that the country is being weaker, which is the classical time to attack, by the way, in international relations. And when they see that, they have attacked. So not just that the former argument about the judicial reform is destroying the democracy and its institutional arrangements. Okay, now it also caused a national trauma remembered for hundreds of years forward, something that will change the face of the country forever. So the debate will be just enhanced. I've mentioned Brothers in Arms before. This institution, civil society organization, was claimed to be by the supporters of the judicial reform to be one of the sources of conflict, and because they have threatened not to go to reserve duty, and now they see that they are actually supporting the core of the war. Okay, so we will have so much more around, another layer around this conflict that has to do with the war.
Right, and you kind of just answered this question, but I still want to know if you have any further thoughts on the fact that will the country go back to that type of political discourse, or maybe it'll be more political discourse, maybe it'll be more controversy surrounding judicial reforms where people say, hey, look, it's because of this that the war happened. It's because of this controversy that we're having that this war happened. Do you think it'll be worse following the end of the war? Do you think it might even get a little bit better?
So I definitely think that we will see that the war will create a causal mechanism, namely because of what happened with the judicial reform, we got the war. Okay, this is what happened. We were too busy in our inner conflict to actually regard that something big is happening around us. So this is first thing that will happen. I think also it will be deeper. And why? The few first weeks of the war, the state and its ministries, its public sector did not perform. Okay, so if this is a country that the one component that is agreed upon is that security is first, and everything has to be done in order for the state to protect its citizens, this axiom broke during the war. And when it broke, the state that actually is always in the state of emergency, under the state of emergency, did not operate well. So if Israel is so invested in security, okay, how come the first thing that should have happened is that everything should have been operating perfectly? The state needed what we called before civil society, or a very strong backline rear of the war. The state needed the citizens in order to perform. Mm-hmm. People were volunteering and giving on their personal resources. This should not have happened. The state should have been able to supply everything. And we still see a certain kind of chaos. So I guess the discourse will have everything involved, from the judicial reform as the variable causing this life-changing event of war, to the fact that, again, the state did not perform well, even though it should have, after more than 7 decades being threatened over and over again by enemies.
Right. I mean, you mentioned the chaos of the civil society basically having to do what the state should have been doing in the first place. You're still seeing people, even abroad in the United States, lining up in JFK and in LAX with duffel bags after duffel bags full of supplies for soldiers, when it's something really, like, it's great that people are doing that. It's amazing that people are volunteering and giving their time, money, and efforts to help the soldiers, but it's something the state should have been helping to take care of. And to close out the interview, what do you think is the end game here? What either could or should be done post-war, post the end of this conflict?
So there's a lot of work to do at the end of this conflict. There is no more of, there should be no more of this Israeli notion of everything will be okay. Trust me, everything will work out just fine. No, the state has to change its arrangements, to modify its institutional arrangements. The state has to, first of all, from the political to the public service, even to society. Okay, everything has to be rearranged in order to understand how Israel can continue to be a modern democratic state. Because if it doesn't rearrange and thrive and innovate after this horrible event that we are still experiencing, this will be the end of this great amazing Israeli democratic entity that we have here. Okay? It is important to understand that the public sector in Israel is very narrow. It should be thriving. The government has to invest as much as possible in the public sector. There should not be charity work by citizens. It's not their place to do. Even though civil society has its respectful realm, this is not it. Okay? People should be able to trust their state again. Mm-hmm. As for conflicts, the state will thrive as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict will be resolved somehow. I know that this is something very, very simplistic to say, but some arrangement has to be achieved. And to resolve, this is the most important thing, the inner conflict that was caused a year back because of the judicial reform. Okay? Even today, even during the war, there are voices. There are voices, hence our conversation about unity. There are voices that still echo the judicial reform claims, meaning that groups in society still clash even during war. Okay, this is why I have said this is not your actual unity. It is not. It is just a state of existence under the state of emergency. So I do hope that we get to see a brighter future for Israel.
I 100% agree, and I definitely hope we see, I hope there is that light at the end of the tunnel, to use that metaphor. I think that might be the best description for it. Dr. Niva Golan Nadir, thank you so much for joining us today for this amazing interview.
Thank you, Jonah. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.